have a question.
Yes.
How do you discover these yarns?
Actually, our mill, one of our mills had gave us a list of different things that they can procure when we talked to them about this year's barn box schedule and the fact that we wanted to. So let me just back up a second. Our steady yarns that we have in stock all the time, like our basic, um, they're not basic, but our regular yarns that we always stock and restock, like Kent and Stone Soup and Better Breakfast, those are all fibers that are sourced in the USA, spun in the USA, and everything about them is made in the USA. And for Barn Box, we do that too, but we also give ourselves permission to travel further afield in the, in the, with the goal of giving all of us the opportunity to try as many different things as possible. So, one of the mills that we work with has access to fiber from everywhere. And they, while they do focus on the local farms near them and they do process a lot of fiber locally, they are very willing to and able to bring in fiber from other places, so that, and it's, and they really seek out yarns that are sustainably um, raised and compassionately treated animals, and working with sources in different countries that have regulations and things that uphold like a healthy fiber industry. So they gave us a list of all the different things that they could get, and we just went crazy for this year's barn box. So that's where we got and they bring it in and they spin it in the USA, so it's all spun here at their family owned mill, um, by by employees that live locally to them. So it's a really nice, and they're super picky fiber people. So they're very, very knowledgeable about fiber themselves, and they do fiber crafts. So they're spinning yarn for knitters and not just to get the yarn spun. So they're really, really picky about the quality of the fiber that they bring in. And if they don't like something, they'll just say, we don't like working with this. And, can we, or would you be willing to move on to something else? Or we don't like this batch, but maybe if we look a little further, we can get some that we like better, which I really appreciate about them. And really everything we get from them is just beautifully, beautifully made. The old Norwegian, so when we got the list, we looked up, all the different sheep on it and all the different breeds and what kind of, fiber to expect, what to expect from the fiber itself, what it would be good to, how, how rare it is, et cetera, things like that, what we could afford. Some things are so rare that we either can't get enough or we can't afford to get it. So we have to work with our budget. But this was on the list, and I researched it a little bit before, while going through the list, and it sounded really nice. So I knew about Norwegian sheep and Northern European sheep, but I didn't know about this very specific breed. So I'm always willing to take a chance on something. And our mill will bring in like a few pounds of, you know, whatever, and they'll spin samples for us. And then we can decide, if we don't like the sample, we can decide to, switch horses at that point before we spin 400 skeins or whatever it is that we're ordering. So it's an adventure for us as well as for you. um, and sometimes my first opportunity to knit with the yarn is only like a couple months before that yarn is shipped to you. So sometimes even though we've seen a sample, we haven't seen a sample in that weight of that color or, that number of plies. So the actual yarn I'm going to design with, which is, it's very important to understand what you're designing with, doesn't really land in my hands right away. But from the samples that we get, I can usually start to think about what kind of item I might want to knit with it. And this is one example of that. We didn't, I'm trying to think when we ordered it. It was like in the early fall, and I don't think we got a sample. We got a fiber sample, like a lock of fiber or a little strip of fiber, but we didn't get a yarn sample for this ahead of time. So we waited with bated breath, and it turned out I really like it. And it's the kind of yarn I really like personally. I have nothing against soft yarn, but I have a lot of respect for yarns that are going to wear well and be beautiful and sturdy over a long lifetime, because I really wear my hand knits all the time. And I don't want them to fall apart and get pilly and dingy looking, within a couple of years of being knit. So over time, I have fallen in love with these sturdier breeds of animals and the fiber that they produce, and the quest to get the best of that fiber, so I can have the best of both worlds, the softest and the sturdiest, and the most character. For those who are new or even kind of new and haven't kind of heard this before, I began spinning when I moved to Ohio about 22 years ago, and up until that point, like many knitters, I was all about, like, I want, good merino yarn, and some I had some yarn that was more kind of off the grid, but not a lot. And I only liked that yarn if it was really well prepped and everything. And then I began spinning and experiencing fiber from different breeds of sheep, which I never really thought about in terms of the yarn that I was buying for knitting. I just didn't really realize that you could have yarn from individual sheep breeds and experience that character, that separate character that each sheep breed has in their wool. And it just really opened up a world to me of opportunity. And through spinning, I just tried as many different fibers as possible and got to know how different fibers behave. And as it's running through your hands while you're spinning, I mean, it's like the closest you can get to like the absolute understanding of the fiber behavior, just like kids in a classroom are all really different, and as a teacher you have to kind of get to know each one, or even in a family as a mother you have to kind of understand each child and the way they learn and the way they approach the world, and working with fiber from different sheep breeds is kind of like that. And I just fell in love with that whole process and that whole world. And over time, after I started my company and got established as a knitwear designer, I really wanted to start making yarns to reflect my interests and the things that I felt were lacking in what was available to all knitters. So, and that's kind of the birthplace of our yarns. So this, I'm sorry, I got off on a really long tangent, Tammy, in answering your question. But part of how we come to all our different fibers is really moored in a sense of adventure and kind of be willing to do anything, and knowing that we have cultivated a community of you adventurous people too, and that you're willing to come along with us and see the fiber through our eyes or my eyes, and understand that even though it's not soft and it's not merino or cashmere like, it has a purpose on this earth. And it was, it was grown by a sheep because it has a particular purpose in that sheep's life and that sheep's environment. And for us too, every different every different type of wool, every different breed of wool can be useful in our knitting experience. So that's and that quest, I guess, drives us to kind of constantly be on the lookout. And we're never gonna just throw just any garbage at you guys. I there are places I don't go, because I know it just won't be appealing. Um, I know certain things won't be appealing, or our mills tell us, this just isn't all it's cracked up to be. People talk about this fiber, but honestly, it doesn't make great yarn, and I don't recommend it. And we listen to our mills when they tell us, that, um, when they give us advice, because they're making our product, and we always want the final product to be the best, and we want it to be fiber that they want to work with. And when someone says that to us, we may go to a different mill and say, what do you think about this? Um, and maybe that miller is all about it. Maybe they are all in for making a yarn that another mill isn't interested in doing. So we have our little team of different mills as well, who do like to work with some fibers and don't like to work with other types of fibers. So it's a whole complex, you know, network of people and animals and opportunity that goes into our selections. Okay, anybody else have any questions before we get going? We have a big group today. I'm pretty excited. Yay. All right, so I'm going to start out with a little backstory to this specific sheep breed, the Old Norwegian sheep breed, and go into a little bit of history and genetics because it applies in this case. And also, at the beginning of the year, when we have new people or people who've only been with us a little while, it's always good to go over this a little bit. So sheep are one of the oldest domesticated animals. The farming of sheep, or the use of sheep by humans, dates back to around, as far as we know, 9,000 BC, in the Fertile Crescent region, which is Mesopotamia. Researchers believe that the northern European sheep breeds have a common ancestor in the wild mouflon sheep of the Middle East, which still exists as a feral species in some areas today. So I'm going to show you a picture of that mouflon because you're gonna want to see this for later on. So here is the east, what they call the Eastern mouflon, which is the one that you'll see in the high mountains of Asia, in the Middle East. So Persia, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, those countries. And then this genetics from this sheep migrated to other parts of the world, first to Northern Europe. So in Northern Europe, we do see a descendant of the Asian mouflon sheep, which is this one. It kind of looks like a moose, but it's a sheep. And notice there are lots of things about this creature that are sheep-like, but also, as I said, kind of other bovine kind of characteristics, like that big front chest area, which that long neck, which extends well beyond the front legs and has that long. It's like a mane of long fiber, but it's also a skin. There's skin under there as well. the back area of the body has fairly short hair, and the legs are have extremely short hair, and the horns are huge. And it's a fairly large animal. Okay, let me just bring up one more. And here's a female mouflon. So the females have a little more gentle curve, up the front, much shorter horns that are more like goat's horns, small ears, and a long body, but very lean. You can see very, very short tail if you notice at the back. And we'll talk more about tail length later on. So that's the kind of our original sheep genetics are, passed down partly from this animal. Evidence of faunal remains from early settlements show that sheep and goats have existed in Scandinavia since Neolithic times. Valued as producers of milk, meat, wool, and pelts, the Norse raised sheep and spread them across northern Europe from the late 1700s to the middle of the 11th century. These Viking sheep were the predecessors of modern northern European short-tailed group, which includes the Norwegian Spælsaw, Gotland, Finn sheep, Icelandic, and many others. And you might recognize some of those names from other breeds that we've explored in Barn Box. Northern European short tails have a, guess what? Short tail, which is 8 to 10 vertebrae compared to 16 to 18 in other groups. They also tend to have dual coats, legs with only short hair, a range of fiber color and patterns, and they tend to be hardy in harsh climates. They can be polled or horned. The word polled means hornless, so they can be horned or hornless, and they can also show horns only in the rams and not in the ewes. The most primitive of these short-tail breeds have retained the ability to shed or molt their undercoat. Many of the short-tail breeds have been improved over the centuries, but some have had less or even no additional genetics added to their bloodlines as part of the improvement process. So when you talk about breed improvement, we see this in modern times, and even, but when I say modern times, I'm talking about from the Middle Ages forward. The desire of humans to improve the production value of their animals. And so to do that, they use selective breeding, selective breeding is taking the best of the flock that you have, the best animals you have, and breeding them with each other to keep producing best genetics, best results of your own flock, but still maintaining the overall genetics of that flock. Another way of improving your flock is to bring in sheep which have traits that you desire your flock to have that they don't have. So if you would like your sheep to be bigger, you might bring in genetics from a breed of larger sheep to cross with your own sheep in the hopes of maintaining the best of what your sheep has to offer and the best of what the other breed has to offer, and combine that in a way to improve the breed. You can maintain your breed's singularity by then breeding back on your own flock again. It's a little complicated, but you can dilute the genetics that you bring in, but you can't get rid of them over time. So there's two different ways of improving your sheep, and some strains of these short-tailed sheep were not crossbred in the process of improvement. And the Old Norwegian is one of those. It's thought to be one of the oldest of the short tail breeds. Um, and others, such as Icelandic sheep, are examples of sheep also with preserved genetics. If you remember, those who've been with us a really long time might remember way back when we did Icelandic wool. This is before Barn Box, even. This was in a club. And we talked about how even today in Iceland, it's not allowed for other sheep breeds to be brought to Iceland to crossbreed. So they maintain their genetics in that breed. And the northern and the old Norwegian is the same thing. So despite the improvements that have been used for these sheep, including the old Norwegian, they can be thought of as what one scientist calls imperfect living fossils. While their genetics are preserved, selective breeding over time has still caused some adaptive evolution toward what farmers desired: better wool, more meat production, parasite resistance, adaptation to different environments, etc., with the end result being that even in a breed where you've preserved the genetics quite well, you can still see improvement, and you can still create improvement over time. And sometimes that even just happens with wild sheep due to the changing environment. So their environment changes over time and they adapt to it, and the breed either improves or it doesn't. So if it wants to survive, it will adapt and improve with the environment. And when I say improvement, that's just a term for change. Improvement may be for the better, and it may be for the better, but losing something at the same time. So it might be, for instance, getting a sheep that's easier to handle and has a bigger carcass and produces more meat, but that makes the sheep slower and more and less. It makes it more vulnerable to predators. So improvement is in the eye of the beholder, I suppose you could say. So for instance, there's a small sheep called a soy that's also in this short tail group. It's determined to be the very closest breed to the prehistoric ancestor, the mouflon. Despite the genetic connection, these tiny sheep have wool that is less hairy than it was in antiquity. So they're dual coated sheep, just like many of the short tails, and their hair coat is a smaller percentage now in modern times than it used to be. In fact, during centuries of domestic evolution, the outer hair coat on the earliest sheep evolved into a less coarse hair, while the soft undercoat actually became coarser. So the outer coat softened, but the undercoat became coarser. Few, if any, domestic sheep have wool as fine as that of wild sheep that have not evolved that way. The process of breeding for better wool and a higher volume of wool actually reduce the quality of the finest fibers the animal generates, while allowing for more wool overall to be produced. So that's another example of improving quantity, but undoing some of the quality in the process. There are 34 short tail breeds today, descended from sheep spread across Europe by the Vikings, including some that are exceptionally rare or even endangered. Because each of these modern breeds is distinct, the wool types can range from soft to coarse, short to long, and from straight to very curly, and can even vary within a breed or a single sheep. We talked about this a little bit when we discussed Shetland wool a few times, and the difference between wild Shetland and domesticated or more domesticated Shetland. And that gets a little confusing too. I mean, sheep are domesticated animals, even the wild ones. Even the wild ones are considered a domesticated animal, just FYI. It doesn't mean every single sheep is corralled at night into a barn, but they are an animal that has evolved and adapted to human population in their environment, and therefore they are domesticated. And human evolution has imposed changes on them, as in different breeds. Old Norwegian sheep likely descends from Bronze Age sheep from Western Norway. They are one of the oldest breeds and ancestors to many other breeds in Norway and the rest of Scandinavia, including Iceland and Faroe, and were probably present in the Western Islands as well. The population of Old Norwegian sheep today numbers around 30,000 animals, which is a huge improvement in contrast to the mid 1900s, when the breed had almost disappeared. Old Norse was the most common breed in Norway until the end of the 1800s. At that time, Norway began importing breeds from the UK in a attempt to improve on the sheep that they had. So I'm sorry, not in the 1800s, but in the early 1700s, they began importing sheep from the UK to improve their flocks, and by the end of the 1800s, the Old Norse was beginning to lose favor to these sheep that were improved. This was during the time of the boom in textile production and wool production, and just a worldwide wool boom, when softer white fiber was the most commercially viable product that a wool producer could put out in the market. Through this program of bringing in British stock, the Norway's native population became diluted and, of course, smaller. By the early 1900s, only small and scattered populations of Norwegian short-tailed sheep remained. In 1912, 2 breeding stations were established to conserve the remaining native sheep population, which is really wonderful that, at that moment in time, someone had the desire even to preserve the old breeds. That would have been rare at the time. One of the 2 stations bred the coastal sheep, on which today's Old Norwegian, or also called the Vilsau, is based. The other strain is the inland type that developed into the closely related Norwegian Spelsau. Icelandic sheep were crossed. So the Spelsau were inland sheep, and the difference between these coastal and inland sheep is mostly the following. With the inland group of sheep, Icelandic semen was imported in the 1960s and 1970s to kind of upbreed the Spelsau sheep and improve the flock numbers. Finn sheep and Faroe Island sheep were also used on land in the upbreeding process of the Spal sheep. This breed is raised primarily for meat, so that makes sense. Of the 2 strains, the Old Norwegian, the coastal sheep, or Vilsau means wild sheep. The Old Norwegian most closely maintained its original genetics and resembles the original Northern European short-tailed sheep in Norway. The term Vilsau is not a breed name. It's more like a brand name. It encapsulates both the genetics of the breed and the breeding or production method. So it's mainly used in product marketing. The Norsk Villscout, which is literally the Norwegian wild sheep, is a trademark for old Norwegian sheep reared in the traditional fashion by being kept outside all year long in Norwegian heather moorland. Since 2010, the label Villsauerfront, I won't be able to say this, but it means wild sheep from the coastal Norway, has also been a protected geographic indication in Norway. We talked about this geographic indication when we talked about the New Zealand yarn as well, that there's a label. It's also something that they use with wines, like Chianti wine carries a specific logo and colored label, and only wines produced in Chianti can carry that label. This is similar. The owner of both the trademark and the protected geographic indication is the Common Interest Association in Norsk Villsalag. The creation of the brand name appears to correlate with a subsequent increased interest in keeping the breed alive and going. The hilly landscape between the deep fjords and the high mountains makes crop farming very challenging in Norway, especially in fjord Norway. Luckily, sheep thrive in this type of terrain. In Norway, the resource situation is different than the rest of Scandinavia and other comparable countries. Only about 3% of Norway's landmass is arable or able to be cultivated. But 45% is grazing land that ranges from usable to excellent. Norwegian agriculture is dependent on the extra resource of the uncultivated land and pasture, and it's an important source of income for Norwegian farms. Grazing without fences allows sheep to act with their instincts, and they naturally divide into smaller groups with individuals closely related. If you occasionally encounter if you occasionally encounter sheep far into the wild, you don't need to worry about them being lost. These sheep recognize where they are and they know where they're going. Due to the abundance of pastures in the mountains, there are more than 100,000 mountain farms in Norway. Although the sheep are very independent, farmers still check on their flocks to make sure they're very safe and sound. The law stipulates that farmers have to check at least once a week throughout the summer on their flocks. Grazing sheep is a natural way to prevent the landscape from overgrowing and to maintain biodiversity in Norwegian nature. Although almost 300 endangered species are dependent on the Norwegian landscape. In the autumn, farmers herd sheep back down the mountainsides. Visitors may join the farmers to bring the herd back down from the mountains. And you can, of course, this sounds romantic and interesting, like let's all go. And you can check it, get more information from the Norwegian Trekking Association's website on how to make that happen for yourself or for all of us. Along the coast, the grass is naturally salted by the sea. In a way, Norwegian sheep are seasoned by nature as they eat herbs, grass, and plants. Grazing on the renewable, uncultivated land make the mutton and lamb some of the more sustainable meat products in Norway. In the region around Lofoten and Lyngen in northern Norway, and I apologize for any mispronunciation. So in the region around Lofoten and Lyngen in northern Norway, you can taste Lofotlam and Lyngenlam that has PGI status, meaning it's geographically protected. These farms have even stricter quality requirements than those set by the national Norwegian authorities, which are already quite strict. Much of Norwegian traditional food consists of lamb. Since the Viking Age, we have been enjoying the tradition of Fennelar, which is dried leg of lamb, especially as a Christmas staple. On Christmas Eve, many Norwegians eat pinnekjot lamb ribs as a festive dish. In autumn, fårikål or lamb stew is a must. This is a stew made with lamb and cabbage and is Norway's national dish. The last Thursday in September is even dedicated to it. In Fjord, Norway, you might even eat sheep's head. This is a more sustainable way to use the whole animal and not let any part go to waste. However, I don't think I would partake. I don't know if I'd be able to get that down personally, just based on my experience eating organ meats of other types. I don't think I'd like it. All right. So that's kind of like the history and the cultural importance of these type of sheep in Norway. The thing about Norway is, as you may know or may not, it's they wool is really part of their culture, and they wear wool almost all year round. And lots of people are extremely proud and fond of their wool heritage and their knitting heritage and their fiber heritage overall, which is really really wonderful. Kind of like Iceland, from what I've heard, it's like that too. I've always personally wanted to go to Norway. I love hiking, and I love biking and hiking, and because I don't know anything really about my Norwegian ancestry. I've always wanted to go, and it just seems like a really beautiful place. I'm gonna show you some pictures now of the old Norwegian sheep. Okay, so you saw the mouflon sheep. This is the this is the spell-saw sheep. This is the sheep, the improved spell-saw, improved by genetics. It has a larger body. It's a little more of a long wool sheep. I it's still double coated, but it has it is bred to have longer wool and to be more of a meat producing sheep. So it is larger, longer. I'm not exactly sure if it has horns. I think it does. But this may be a ewe, and that's why you don't see them here. Now, the old Norwegian is, I have a ton of pictures, but here's one. Oh, a little group. So by contrast, these are pretty small sheep. They really and these are ewes. You can see by the shape of those horns, they're not the great big curled horns. So and only 10% of the ewes have horns in the old Norwegian breed, whereas the rams all have horns. So you may or may not get a ewe with horns, and when you do, they're very small and goat-like. But you can see here that there's a big variety of color in the fleece of these animals, and also in the pattern of the color. So the way the color is distributed over the body is different from one sheep to the other, a little bit like Shetlands or Icelandics, where they have different patterns like white noses and black eyes, or black rings around their nose or rings around their eyes, brown fleece and gray fleece as well. But as far as I can tell, within the old Norwegian breed, those color and pattern combinations don't have names the way they do in Icelandic and Shetland breeds. Let me find a picture of a now here's a younger ram. Now those ewes that I just showed you, that was obviously wintertime with snow on the ground, or late fall. It was pretty cold. The fleece is longer. In this picture, you'll see it's a different season. It's one of the warmer seasons, and the animal has the the long upper coat, but its undercoat is very short. You can see it's got a shorter, fluffier look to it. And I would say this is a young ram. The horns are big. They're going to be even bigger. This ram has a little box attached around its neck to a collar. That's a kind of a bell, but it also is a tracking device, and it has a tag on its ear. So while these sheep are allowed to wander all over the place, somebody knows where they are at all times. And um, these newer bells that contain a tracking device are a great way to be able to find um, animals that may have wandered off a little bit. Here are some pictures of the landscape that we're talking about. You know, when we talked about not being able to farm crops, you know, this is why uh, the shapes in the landscape really don't lend themselves to, you know, tractors and big fields of this and that. There's a lot of rock. It's very steep. It's ruddy, and the season is super short for growing anything. Also, there's a lot of seawater nearby, and so you get a lot of. Here's another picture. This is an antique photo of driving sheep. This looks like they're moving sheep either up into the mountains or down. I can't tell exactly. It's kind of at a flat point, but you can see just the hilliness of the area and the kind of ground that it is. It's not going to be much for crop farming outside of a kitchen garden. Maybe this is going to be a picture of kind of the again, the variety of the animals. Now these are young rams. Each of them has a set of horns. You can see the one in the foreground is already starting to curve down. You've got a variety here of fleece colors
We
and
can't see the pictures, Anne.
oh, I'm sorry. Here you go. Sorry about that. You can see here that there's a big variety of fleece color among these sheep, and the pattern of their coats is also different from one sheep to another. This looks like a late summer, early fall time of year when the undercoat is really starting to fluff out. The old Norwegian undercoat remains fairly short. It doesn't grow like the Spalsaw sheep you saw had longer fleece. These sheep, this is a good photograph, a good understanding of the length of their coat. You can also see here that in profile, these sheep really do resemble their ancestors a little bit more than the white long haired sheep that I showed you earlier, with that jutting chest and the big mane of wool around its face and neck. Which, by the way, the face and the neck and shoulders are the best part of the fleece. So it's kind of cool that they have more of that. Okay. I'm going to go back to talking descriptions here. So let's talk a little bit more about the physical characteristics of the Norwegian sheep. They are, or I'll talk. They are small and light-footed. So they're very small and quick, and they're able to get around very easily. They're particularly suited for being kept outside all year, a practice that stems back to the Viking age. They are leaner than crossbred sheep, but they require less oversight because they forage well and flock together for group protection. The grazing habits of the old Norwegian sheep is adapted to the heather moorlands of coastal Norway. The breed can dig through snow to reach heather even during winter. This, combined with relatively mild winters in coastal Norway, means that the breed is capable of being kept outside the entire year. In addition to common heather, Old Norwegian sheep graze on leaves, herbs, kelp, and other seaweed. Rams produce a full set of horns similar to those of their mouflon ancestors. About 10% of ewes have smaller set of goat-like horns. Rams weigh an average of 95 pounds, while ewes ideally weigh around 70 pounds. So that is much smaller than some of the other sheep we've studied, like the huge Wensleydales that weigh 300 pounds, or the border Leicesters that also weigh in at 275, 300 pounds. These are tiny sheep by comparison, really about the size of a big dog in terms of their weight. So, you know, easy to even pick up. Ewes give birth to 1 or 2 lambs at a time, depending on the availability of food in the period leading up to conception and over the course of the winter. There can be a big difference between the sizes of lambs where food availability in winter is poor or where a ewe is carrying 2 lambs. Ewes will usually reject the smallest lamb. Lambs weigh at birth around 6.5 pounds. Ewes have a strong maternal instinct and will rest for up to 3 days after birth to get to know their lambs and to allow them to gain strength and become steadier on their feet. The ewe then rejoins the flock, which also protects her lambs. And that all makes a lot of sense in terms of the kind of wandering life that they have out in pasture. Usually I didn't find information about the time of year that these sheep lamb at. Some lamb a little bit earlier than some breeds lamb earlier than others, and I didn't really have a good sense of that from what I was reading. But I'm assuming that from that behavior of protecting their and staying with their lambs for a while after birth, that they are already, for the most part, out in pastures further from home where they can't expect to be coddled. That they need to give themselves a little time and strength so that they can continue in a healthy way out in pasture. Ewes and lambs form herds of 20 to 40 animals, whilst rams form herds of their own. The breed is particularly alert and fast-moving. There is always one animal on guard. Old Norwegian sheep have a unique flight behavior compared with other sheep. When escaping predators, the herd will flee in a distinctive fan-shaped pattern that draws the predator toward the stronger, faster animals, thereby protecting weaker individuals by allowing them to seek refuge. Because of the breed's speed, losses to predators are rarely registered. The speed of this sheep also means that they are not easy to control using a sheepdog, as it uses the same flight tactic when approached by a dog as it does with a predator. Dogs, therefore, only return with a few animals. The sheep will also enter water and swim away to avoid being captured. The old Norwegian sheep does not produce a lot of meat, but their meat is renowned for being tender and marbled. If reared traditionally, the taste is described as approaching gamey and is considered sweeter than normal mutton when cured. Okay, any questions about the sheep themselves? I have a couple pictures with lambs. I know that's always a favorite. So here's a mother. Look at that, so cute. And you can see that these sheep, do resemble the Gotland sheep that we studied a while ago. Even you can see even these little lambs, that jutting chest. I love that feature that they have. So that's and that's a very dark fleece mama with very white lambs, which can happen. The genetics of a wild sheep like this are very much less easy to control. Let's see. Let's see if I can. I know I have more. I thought this was kind of cool. So this is This is a photograph of the sheep in, looks like summer pasture, but late summer when their coats are, you can see that their coats have grown out, but they're starting to molt. I'm gonna see if I can zoom in a little bit. So on the hind end, you can see that some of that wool is starting to fall out. And I'm assuming that to capture that, you can walk behind them and pick that wool up, but I'm assuming you can also comb it out or brush it out as well. Um, that said, a lot of it probably goes by the wayside. The breed has evolved to have a shorter coat because they are a wild breed. So the shorter coat, where the spell saw sheep were improved to have longer, more fiber, that was never done with the Vilsaw sheep because it caused problems in the winter. You can imagine with a very long coat, sheep can in the wild can get hung up just like as if they had a leash on and got hung up in a tree branch or something or a shrubbery. It can be the end of them if that happens. So wool characteristics. Where the spell saw is bred as a long wool sheep, it is not desirable for the old Norwegian wool to be long because it causes issues in the winter. The soft undercoat is fine and varies in color from almost white through gray and brown shades and patterns to almost black. Wool that is left to grow falls off in early July and, if collected, may be used for knitting or weaving. The breed naturally sheds its wool, so there should be little or no need to shear. But what some farmers do, and this is true for some Shetland sheep as well, when they begin to molt, there comes a point at which, and they call that ruing, you can actually grab the fleece and pull it, and it'll come off like in a almost like a pelt, as if you're shearing, but it can be just pulled off. So I imagine some people who desire to collect the fleece can push the process along by ruining it as well. The thing about these fleeces is that they do need to be sorted. The hair needs to be separated from the fleece, from the fluffy undercoat. And so this type of fleece fell out of favor as during the Industrial Revolution in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, which is what caused the breed to diminish so much by the middle of the 20th century. Vilsaw, or the wild sheep, which now exists only in remnant flocks, grow wool that is prized by knitters and textile crafters for its unique properties. The tough, resistant outer coat is shiny and long and can be and has has a use of its own, which I'll get to in a sec. And the finer inner coat can be sorted out to make soft yarns for knitting and next to the skin garments or garments for wearing, like this one. The wool is exceptionally strong, resists wind and rain, and can be knit into a traditional Nordic sweater that is truly authentic. If used correctly, the wool can also be soft. The sheep's two-layer coat make them particularly appealing to crafters because the undercoat is light, soft, and warm, whereas the outer coat is glossy, durable, and water resistant. Fleece colors vary from brown to taupe to beige, so lovely effects can be created even without dyeing. Its use in Norway goes at least as far back as the Viking Age, where wool was used to weave sails. Remember, we saw those in the Gotland series. We saw some ship sails that were woven out of wool. And the dense, so was used to weave sails, and the dense wadmal fabric that also survived, that also allowed for survival in North Sea weather. Wadmal is a dense twill fabric. It's woven so densely that it can shed water and resist wind and rain. And it was used by sailors um, in these kind of smock-like garments and also aprons that covered their bodies and protected them from that salt spray and that heavy wind that they experience at sea. The wool of the old Norwegian can be used to weave wadmal so tough that an arrow cannot penetrate it. Wool is Norway's go-to fabric for staying warm and dry when the temperature drops. We couldn't have been populating Norway without the old breeds, says Anamor Sundbo, textile historian. People couldn't have crossed the oceans on Viking ships without wool sails. They couldn't have survived in open boats without wearing this wool. They couldn't have survived in temperatures we have along the coasts and up in the mountains. But today we have gotten so rich that we cannot afford to take care of this little sheep because it doesn't pay its way in the way of meat. She was kind of commenting on the, you know, the demise of the size of the flocks. Today, the wool that's not sent off for carpets is mainly spun by hand spinners and a couple of smaller mills. If you can hand spin, you can do the craft. You can select fiber for whatever it should be, from the very finest shawl that you could put through a ring up to the toughest rag rug. You can make everything out of one fleece from one of these primitive old sheep. The tougher yarn, she adds, can be spun into tapestry wool so durable it will last 1,000 years. For example, the council chambers in the Oslo City Hall are decorated with tapestries made from wool, and in Bergen, a 13th century royal residence that's now a museum, is decorated with a 125 kilo tapestry made in the 1950s and 60s. And that would be approximately 275 pounds of wool in a piece. Anamor Sundbo is actually the author of several knitting books, the Selbu, and she's written about kind of how we discard what can be found in like the discarded things that go by the wayside. And she got to this point by she purchased a wool mill because in her area there were no more wool mills and she had a flock of these old Norwegian sheep. And in the mill there were several tons, I think, of bales of wool rags. And when she started like taking apart these bales, it was a treasure trove of historical garments knit by hand, many of them in beautiful Norwegian patterns. And she began to also collect, she kind of put it out there, I want to like document these garments, all the different patterns, where they're from, what part of the country they're from, et cetera, et cetera. So she actually began collecting more of them. And she's written several books about Norwegian knitting history, knitting styles, and the history of particular types of garments in Norwegian culture. So she's a person to look out for. Another author that I have a couple of books by, oh darn it, I'm not going to remember her name now because I'm on camera. She's written about Norwegian knitting patterns and the places in Norway and the people who created them and produced them, both hand knitters and factories. And when I say factory, many times that means like a very small factory with employees who are hand knitting the garments that are sold by the factory, which is just kind of astounding. So rather than a cottage industry, it's like a cottage industry, but in a factory. So all these people came to work, mostly women, but men too, came to work every day and knitted their day away or wove or, created items to be sold to be sold away. And that's why, that's why you find garments that are 50, 100 years old, um, among people who are from those cultures, because they really do understand the value of what they're wearing. All right, so for our yarn, we've got this. Well, first of all, any questions? Anybody want to say anything? Or I love doing this kind of sheep where it
And
has. Yes.
hi, I was in Norway this past summer
Uh-huh.
and was lucky to speak to some shepherds from Lofoten,
Uh-huh.
and they talked about the sea sheep, and one of the problems they're having with predators is from sea eagles. And I
Uh-huh.
just thought they're larger than our eagles,
Uh-huh.
maybe 8 foot wingspans, and they'll
Wow.
carry off the lambs. And it's just it aligns with everything you're saying, but it was
Yeah.
interesting.
And of course they're probably not carrying off the rejected lambs. But
No,
but
yeah.
we but this is like survival of the fittest, and it's a natural predator. And um hopefully the breed will um figure figure out what to do about it. These are the things that cause evolution and improvement in a breed. And you know I'm sure there's going to be some way that the animal figures out how to get around that. Although, um, to your point, sometimes a predator like that kind of comes out of nowhere due to human behavior that the animals really can't control. So, dumping, for instance, can bring predator birds into an area, and you know, and make them fat and big, much bigger than they would be in a wild situation. So sometimes the predators have unfair advantages given to them by humankind. Anybody else? Has anyone else been to Norway? Oh, Linda, did you love it?
I did. It's wonderful. I wasn't in a position to be going into knitting shops or talking with anybody who was involved with sheep, but it's beautiful. The picture you showed of the mountain with the sheep walking along the road. We were on one island that looking out of the little place where we were staying, that's just what it looked like, and it was
Uh,
fabulous.
I'm just
Made
dying.
me want to go back.
I'm just dying to go and spend a summer there. I don't I don't think I could stand a winter, but I would love to go in the summer and walk all over and see.
It's just gorgeous, and there were a lot of tourists from Norway, but just doing like weekend hikes like that.
Yes, it's amazing. Norway has an extensive park system that they manage, that the government manages. People can go. You are free to wander anywhere in Norway. So there's no posted land. You can free to wander is like a law there. You do have to have a permit to fish and hunt, but you can get those. And when you're wandering freely, um, you can pick plants and berries to eat while you're there. You can interact with animals that you meet if you feel comfortable doing that. It's really, they really encourage people to interact with nature to a large extent, and it's expected that people will do that. It's one of the few, I feel like that's one of the few countries that has really embraced that. Maybe it's one of the, in these um Scandinavian countries, maybe it's one of the things, one of the byproducts of not having such a military focus, as the rest of Europe does, that they can afford to, spend their tax money that way. I don't know. Anyway, it is really, really beautiful there, and sheep thrive. And of course, there's some urban sprawl in Norway, just like everywhere else, but they do have they have really good reasons to preserve what they have, and also some of the land is just not suited to building and spreading out. There's just going to be so much you can do with a Rocky Mountain. All right, so our yarn is kind of a combination of fiber colors. It's a gray. When you put it next to brown, it's gray, and when you put it next to gray, it looks a little brown. It's got some silvery highlights. It's a heather, what we call heather, meaning it's mixed and but distinct fiber colors can be determined in it. There's a little bit of gold in it even, I think. And when you knit with it, it's slightly streaky, although not so much that you'll get banding. I didn't experience any like banding when I changed skeins with this yarn. It is remarkably consistent from one skein to the next. I did not alternate skeins when I knit this, although each piece I got the front out of one skein, the back out of another skein, and I think I needed like a skein and a half to knit the sleeves, which are kind of large. You'll also see some individual little dots of color, so a little bit of nep in there. So little dots of very dark brown or very light cream coming out. I really like the way it handles. It's very lightweight. Even with the 3-ply construction, which I loved about this, that it's got a nice smooth construction. It's not especially tacky to itself when you're knitting, so the stitches knit up smoothly for a yarn like this. As you know, as you may remember from past yarns we've done, sometimes when a yarn is pretty hairy, like the border Leicester, it can actually be a little challenging to pick up the stitches as you're knitting and glide along the way we like to. But this is nice and smooth, and the sheen on it is quite nice as well. It's not a lot of sheen, but it's a subtle sheen that comes from the fiber being combed and treated with a little more extra drafting so that it's nice and smooth. While it is a DK weight and it does knit to a DK gauge, with 390 yards in a skein, it actually goes really far and that's why it's so lightweight. I mean, the amount of air that you can spin into this fiber and maintain a strong yarn is really quite amazing. I really, really liked working with it. Any questions about the yarn itself? I'm knitting fingerless mitts with my leftovers. I'm knitting some fingerless mitts with cables on the back. So I figured seems like really tough yarn that would be perfect for that kind of project too. Questions, comments, anybody? Hi, Melissa. We missed you. We've been missing you.
I've been missing you too, but I've had the plague.
Oh, no.
For 28 days.
Oh, no. Yeah, you don't sound great.
I'm officially better. But yeah, I still sound a little funky.
Will we see you in the sweater knit along?
I hope so. I did sign up for it. I'm trying really hard to get there. Things have been a little nap oriented recently, but naps are good. Yeah. Naps are good. Naps help you get better, I've decided. Yeah.
Yeah, you need to rest. Anybody else got anything they want to say?
I had actually a question that I saw in the channel.
Okay.
And I want to know too, the sweater behind you with the beautiful cabling, the gray one, what is that? Is that
this one or this one?
Yeah,
it's called Dark Roast.
Oh, wow. That looks so different in the pale gray.
Yeah, this one is knit in Kent worsted in the tide pool color, or no, the beach pebble color.
Wow, that's gorgeous.
And yeah, And the cables really pop in that yarn.
Is there loft enough in the Norwegian to do something with that kind of cable?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
but that's a worsted weight like that. You won't be able to do that. But maybe like the robin's nest
The
here,
robin's nest. Yeah. That's a
or
beautiful one too.
Renee, which has cables, or even the Rust Belt River or the romance novel might work. It really does make beautiful cables. I'm trying to think what other DK cabled. Maybe herring weave would be nice, or I can never think of my.
Would it work for Vespa? That's not cables, but
Yeah, I mean the stitch definition.
Or counterweights.
Yeah, counterweights would be perfect.
Yeah, I've been wanting to make another counterweights. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Tammy?
I'm knitting this in the fall line scarf.
Oh, very nice.
I love it. The pattern's so much fun
Oh,
and
good.
relaxing. So
Yeah.
and it's nice and fluffy. So I agree with what you know.
Yeah.
I'm just really pleased.
Yeah, it's so lightweight that for open work it'd be really nice. It would make a beautiful kind of stable open work piece. And it relaxes when you block it. It doesn't it's not super springy yarn, so it won't if you're doing open work, the holes won't close up after you wash it or anything. You're muted.
There we go. Finally got it. This is my swatch that has some open work that I blocked, and it's really it really lays well. I mean, it just has a nice drape, and
the drape of this yarn is just beautiful.
Yeah, I'm really pleased with it.
Yeah, I mean, this is to me the real test of how something's gonna drape is stockinette stitch and how even it's gonna be, and if it's gonna torque or slant to one side or the other. And this is just, I mean, it's just so smooth. I can't get over it when I see it. The way that the folds fall is just so nice. It's not too puffy or too limp. I really like it.
So what size needles did you use for that sweater?
I used 4s and 6s.
4s and 6s, okay.
Yeah. The thing about the 3-ply versus a 2-ply yarn, 2-ply yarn will bloom a lot more than 3-ply yarn. So I always find I have to go down a little bit in my expected needle size. Like normally with our other DK yarns, I would knit them on a size 7 needle, probably for a sweater, or even an 8. But with this, I got more even stitches on the size 6. When I swatched on size 7, some of my stitches were uneven. So I stuck to and I'm glad. And then after a good washing, the stitches just became really consistent and the surface of the fabric is really nice. Anybody else have a question?
Yeah, Anne.
Yeah.
What's what did you call the sweater that you have on? What is that?
The name is Soft Outlines, and it's going to be published not this Wednesday but next Wednesday.
Okay.
Yeah. We had hoped to bring this sweater out on Christmas Day actually, but my proofreader had a family emergency and had to and has been dealing with that for about a month. So everything got backed up a little bit. So we're going to release it for my birthday next week instead.
Okay.
Because I have soft outlines now. My outlines are getting softer and softer and softer. Okay. Anybody else have a question? Well, let's see. We've got a few. Let me see if anybody down here. We've got a few things going on. A few announcements. Our sweater knit along, our January sweater knit along is underway, but it's not too late to join. We'll be knitting sweaters until March. So if you want to knit a sweater with us, or you just want to hang out and knit with us, we don't have a lot of rules. The only rule is that you should be using one of my patterns or or knitting with one of our yarns. And that's really the only rule. And you have to be nice. You have to get along with others. And that's just not hard in our group. We have a really nice, very low key group of people that knit together on Wednesday evenings and Saturdays. And to get in to the Zoom chat, the Zoom group, you just have to buy entry to the, it's called Because I Can Knit Along. And with your purchase of your entry, you get a free pattern. So that's going on right now. On Wednesday, we'll be releasing our annual Valentine's Day kit, which you won't want to miss. Also a very beautiful yarn. Very, very nice to handle. And we have a brand new pattern to go with that. And we will be at home, and those tend to sell out immediately. So I'm just saying, keep your eye on the newsletter if you like a nice pop of Valentine fun. We will be having another barn box in 2 months, and I'm just trying to think of anything else that's happening before then. Probably by the next barn box, our spring knit along will have begun as well. And that's going to be accessories and lace and, shawls and scarves and lightweight things to get ready for spring and summer. I think that's it. You can, if you're not signed up for our newsletter, you should be, and you can sign up on our website at barenakedwools.com. And I think that's all I have to say. If anybody has anything else to say, let me know. Now's your moment. Going, gone. All right, you guys, I'm going to go have some lunch. Enjoy the rest of your day. It's a balmy 30 degrees here, so definitely getting outside today for a while. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Anne. That was great.
Thank you for coming.